welcome back to the Striha Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Parker Striha, and on today's episode, we are going to be discussing all of the NBA teams that missed the playoffs. I'm by no means a professional, but I do love talking about sports, so thank you for joining me. So we are going to start with the Western Conference, and we are just going to go over all 7 teams that didn't make it in order of seed from 9 to 15, and then we'll do the same for the East. I'll try to talk about each team for a couple minutes, or maybe not even a minute, depending on the team. So let's get started with the Western Conference. The Los Angeles Clippers had a record of 42-40 this year. They lost to the Pelicans in the play-in game for the 8th seed, which I don't like. I don't like that a team with a losing record made the playoffs. It just looks bad for basketball. But I really like the Clippers. They weren't expected to do a lot this year, with Paul George missing as much time as he did and with Kawhi Leonard missing all year. But I think this team is going to just reload and try to keep as many of their key players as they can, and they're going to make a really strong push for the title next year. San Antonio Spurs are 34-48. Not a lot of talent on that team other than DeJounte Murray and Keldon Johnson. They have some good players, but I don't really like that team right now. I think they just need to get better, add some more talent, because who knows when Greg Popovich could decide to retire. Just try to make one more push for a ring for him. The Los Angeles Lakers were 33-49 this year, and wow, that I think kind of screwed everyone's bets over that thought they were going to go to the finals this year. But yeah, that team just was not good at all. And I think a lot of the blame is being thrown on Russell Westbrook, and I don't like that. I don't think it's his fault that the team sucked this year. You can't throw all that on one player when Anthony Davis missed a bunch of games, LeBron James missed a bunch of games, and just their role players just were not good, but somehow it's all Russell Westbrook's fault. He's one of my favorite players of all time, but that's not why I'm kind of defending him in this situation. You just can't blame your so-called third star for the failure of a team when you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis on your roster. Something obviously needs to change. Otherwise, I can see this becoming an every year thing for the Lakers. The Sacramento Kings had a record of 30-52. Bet you didn't think the Lakers would only be 3 games better than the Kings. I don't really like the Kings. I think their roster is awful other than Sabonis and Davion Mitchell and De'Aaron Fox. They need to improve. They haven't been in the playoffs in 15 years or something crazy. They're just a bad team, bad organization. I love De'Aaron Fox, and I don't like him there just because that team sucks and I want to see him succeed. But I don't know. That organization has a lot more questions than it does answers right now. I think they have a promising young core with Sabonis, Mitchell, and Fox, but they just need to find those missing pieces. I hate that they traded Halliburton at the deadline, but it is what it is. I'm not a Kings fan. I don't really have a horse in that race, so to say. I don't really care how good or bad they are, but it is just it's kind of sad that they're this bad. The Portland Trailblazers had a record of 27-55, with Damian Lillard missing, I believe, most of, if not the entire season, and then they traded away CJ McCollum, which, it was kind of a blessing in disguise for them, because now they got to see how good Anthony Simons is, I should say, and he is real good. He is going to be that second guard with Damian Lillard. If Lillard is even on the roster next year, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that, because this team is bad, and I don't know if he wants to be a part of a rebuild. So, I could see him getting traded. I don't know where, but this Portland Trailblazers team is really bad. Really, really bad. Even with Damian Lillard, I don't like that team to go anywhere. Even as an 8th seed, I don't see them getting very far. So that team, I think, just needs to completely blow it up. Trade all of their main guys. Trade Nurkic. Trade Lillard. Trade whoever they have to except for Anthony Simons, and just completely rebuild that roster from the ground up. Moving on to the Oklahoma City Thunder, who had a record of 24-58. This team was not expected to do anything this year because they are in a rebuild. But I mean, they have some of my favorite players in the league. I love Lou Dort. I love Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Josh Giddey, Alexei Pokusevsky. I mean, I am a Thunder fan, but I don't really like the roster right now. I think there needs to be some improvement. Obviously, I think we need to get a dominant franchise big man that the roster does not have. I don't think Pokusevsky is that guy. Isaiah Roby, Bradley, or Darius Baisley, Derek Favors, they're not the center or power forward of the future. So I think if they can, a move I'd really like them to do, or at least try to get a guy like Zion Williamson. I don't think it'll happen, but if he tries to force his way out of New Orleans, there aren't teams that have there aren't many teams that have the assets like the Thunder do to make a move like that. But as I'm recording this, I believe it was the day before I'm recording this actually that I saw news that Bol apparently wants to come to OKC because he thinks he'll be a starting center. And I mean, I'd love that move. I like Bol, and I'd love to see him in OKC where he can actually play, get some really meaningful minutes, and maybe he can develop into one of the best centers in the league. But it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. They have, I think, 3 or 4 first-round picks this year. I want to see them trade those picks because, I mean, at least the Clippers one isn't going to be great unless that pick gets super lucky in the lottery. And they have the Suns pick, which is going to be nothing. And then their pick, which I think is 3rd or 4th best odds at the number 1 overall pick this year. So, I mean, their pick could be great, but I don't really know about those other 2. And then moving on to the worst team in the league, the Houston Rockets, who had a 20-62 record this year. Another team that was not expected to do a lot this year just because the state of that roster. I hope they trade John Wall because there's no point in having him there. He doesn't fit their roster. I hope they trade Eric Gordon. They just need to get younger. Trade Dennis Schroeder. I love Jalen Green. I love Kevin Porter Jr. Alperen Sengun I like. But that team has a long ways to go before I think they're a competent roster and a roster that can compete in the stacked Western Conference. Going to the Eastern Conference, we're going to start with the Cleveland Cavaliers, who were 44-38 this year. Another team that was not expected to do a lot this year, and then they kind of came into the season and went crazy. They were really good for a majority of the season, but then injuries kind of took them out from really any consideration at a deep playoff run. Evan Mobley was hurt a lot. Ricky Rubio tore his ACL, I think. Karis LeVert missed a couple games. Colin Sexton, I think, missed the entire season. That team's they have some good pieces, and they could be scary in the future because I like Jared Allen. I like Evan Mobley, Karis LeVert. Darius Garland is one of the best point guards in the league. They could be really good next year, but I think that team just needs to stay healthy. I think if they had stayed healthy, they wouldn't have even been in the play-in. They probably would have been a top 4 or 5 seed, but it's in the past. They're not in the playoffs, so it'll be interesting to see what they do this offseason. I think they're going to focus more on just maintaining the players that they have instead of trying to spend or trade big to get new players in. The Charlotte Hornets had a record of 43-39. This team has a lot more questions than answers, just like I believe it was the Kings I said in the Western Conference. I love LaMelo Ball, PJ Washington, Miles Bridges. I like the players on the Hornets, but something needs to change. I don't know if it's ownership, if it's front office, if it's coach, but they lost in the play-in 2 straight years, and I just don't really trust that roster to go anywhere. I think they really need to make an effort to get a dominant center. Montrezl Harrell is good, but he's not, in my opinion, a number 1 center that you can trust for 30, 35 minutes a game. So I think if they can do that, they can be a really solid team next year going into, I believe, LaMelo Ball's 3rd year. So, I mean, that team could be good next year. But until they get a dominant center or even a better center, I don't think that team's going to go anywhere. The New York Knicks had a record of 37-45 this year. Really, really disappointing considering the record that they had last year. I mean, this was just a down year for the Knicks. Another team I just really don't like their roster. I like some of their players. RJ Barrett, Obi Toppin, Emmanuel Quickley. But they need to trade Julius Randle. They need to trade, I think Derrick Rose is still on that team. Alec Burks. Just get rid of the old guys on the team and try to go young and try to just rebuild that roster. Because, I mean, I don't even know what their problem was this year. I don't know if it was injuries or just a down year. But that team has the potential to be really good. I think they're a team that is in the running to get a Zion Williamson if he is traded, just because they have Cam Reddish and they have RJ Barrett. So they'd reunite the three Duke guys. But I don't know. If they don't get Zion, I don't really know what that team's going to do. I think they're going to be probably the most aggressive team in acquiring Zion this year. And if they do, I really like that team's chances next year in the East. The Washington Wizards had a record of 35-47, which, I mean, considering Bradley Beal missed a lot of the year and just that roster is not great, I consider that a success for them. I don't really have a lot to say about them. I don't really like their roster. I think it needs a lot of improvement. But if Bradley Beal decides to re-sign with Washington this year, the Wizards could be really good next year if they put Bradley Beal with Kyle Kuzma, with Kristaps Porzingis. The team has potential to at least compete for a play-in spot, but I think it all depends on what Bradley Beal does this offseason. The Indiana Pacers had a record of 25-57. Another team that has a really, really bad roster. But I love Tyrese Halliburton, one of my favorite players in the league, and I think he obviously is going to be a cornerstone of that franchise moving forward, along with Miles Turner. But that roster just needs a complete overhaul. Other than those two, that's really all I got to say. That team is bad. They need more talent, completely flip the roster, and go into rebuild mode. The Detroit Pistons were 23-59, which I think was kind of expected that they were going to be bad this year. That roster is not great. Cade Cunningham is good when he's healthy. They have some good players on that roster, but they're very far from being a competitive team in the East or even in the NBA in general. I think they just need to completely, with a lot of these teams, I think they just need to overhaul some of their roster spots, because I think they're too deep in a rebuild that a lot of their younger guys aren't developing, and that team just is not great right now. And then the Orlando Magic, who went 22-60 and were the worst seed in the East. I like the Magic. I like a lot of the pieces they have. I like Mohamed Bamba. I like Jonathan Isaac, Markelle Fultz, Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs, Bol, Franz Wagner. I really like that roster, but they're just super young and very inexperienced when it comes to big games and especially playoff games. So I don't really have any expectations for that team next year. Maybe 2 years from now they could be good if some of their players take a really big step up and develop, or if they do something crazy in the offseason. But I just don't really like that roster. I don't think they're going to compete for a very long time unless something changes. But I don't really see that happening. But as always, I'm your host, Parker Striha, and this has been the Striha Sports Podcast. Our random sport fact of the day is that the 2001 Seattle Mariners and 1906 Chicago Cubs are tied for the most wins ever in a single season with 116. As always, thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for whenever a new video gets posted.